The chilling mystery of Megan Newborough's murder. True crime documentary. Hook. She was just an ordinary woman, until the truth about her past came crashing in. Chased by dangerous enemies, haunted by secrets, and caught in a deadly game she never asked for. Can Megan survive what's coming? The shocking twists are just beginning. Keep watching if you dare to find out what happens next. The streets were quiet. Too quiet. The faint hum of the city seemed miles away. Megan Newborough walked home from work. It was late. Her footsteps echoed on the wet pavement. Each step felt heavier than the last. She was alone. The cold air cut through her jacket. Her breath formed clouds in front of her face. A light drizzle began to fall. Her eyes darted around. The shadows seemed to move. A distant sound, a car passing, tires splashing. But it was distant. Too distant. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She jumped, startled. It was a text from her friend, almost home. Megan typed back, "Yeah, just around the corner." She shoved the phone back into her pocket. Her pace quickened. Something fell off. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She glanced behind her. Nothing. But there was someone ahead. A man. He was standing still under a street lamp, his face hidden in the shadows. Megan's heart raced. She tried to shake the feeling. It was just a man waiting for the bus, right? But he didn't move. Not a twitch. She forced her eyes forward. A streetlight flickered overhead. She walked faster, her breath shallow. The man's shadow grew longer as she passed. The air felt thicker. Megan's skin crawled. Was he following her? She tried to glance back. Too late. A shadow loomed just behind her now. She could feel it. Closer. Closer. She broke into a run, her heels clicking faster. But the man, he matched her pace. Every step, every move. Megan's panic grew. Her phone, where was it? She needed to call someone, but the fear paralyzed her. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She heard him, his breath, too close now. She didn't dare look back. Suddenly a sound, a sharp, harsh noise. Her foot caught on something. She fell hard. Her knees scraped the pavement. She gasped, trying to push herself up. But the man was there, his hand on her shoulder. Cold, tight. "Don't scream," he whispered. Her blood froze. The world spun. She tried to fight. Her hand reached for anything, but it was too late. Too late, his grip tightened. Megan gasped for air, her lungs burning. Her eyes locked onto his, cold, emotionless. His face barely visible in the dim light. She twisted, trying to break free, but his hand stayed firm. The fear in her chest roared. Her mind raced. What did he want? Why her? The sound of his breathing was all she could hear. The city distant, silent. A long pause. Then he spoke. "You should have stayed home," he murmured. His voice was low, almost a whisper. She tried to scream. No sound came. Her throat was tight. Her heart was pounding. She could feel his breath on her neck. It reeked of something rancid. His fingers dug deeper into her skin. Terror filled her veins. Megan's mind spun with possibilities. But there was no way out. Her body was frozen. She felt every muscle locking in place. A sickening realization hit. He wasn't just after money. He wasn't just after anything tangible. He wanted her. And worse. He was enjoying this. His grip slackened for a moment. She could feel her pulse in her ears. This was it. Her last chance. Her hands scrambled. Desperate. She reached into her pocket. The phone. Her fingers brushed the screen. But it slipped. Fell. Shattered on the ground. The shards scattered like broken promises. Her heart sank. It was over. The man's eyes glinted. A cruel smile crept onto his lips. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. Then, suddenly, a flash of light. A car's headlights. A distant shout. The man froze. Megan's body trembled with fear and relief. The man looked around quickly. The headlights were getting closer. He hesitated. Then, without warning, he pulled away. He turned on his heel and ran. Megan lay there, gasping for breath. Her body felt heavy, paralyzed. She couldn't move, couldn't think. But the car, it was closer now. It stopped. The door opened. Someone stepped out. A woman. The stranger ran towards her. "Megan," she shouted. Megan blinked, still shaking. The woman knelt beside her. "Are you all right? Can you hear me?" Megan could only nod, tears flooding her eyes. But the man was gone. He had disappeared into the shadows. Just like that. No trace. No explanation. The woman's hands were shaking as she helped Megan to her feet. "You're safe now," she said, though her voice trembled too. Megan's mind spun, still unable to fully process what had just happened. The car was parked nearby, engine still running, lights blinding in the darkness. The woman guided her toward it. "Get in," she urged. "We need to get you out of here." Megan hesitated, her legs weak, but she managed to stumble toward the door. She barely noticed the warmth of the seat as she slid inside. The woman slammed the door shut behind her and quickly rushed around to the driver's side. Megan tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, rasping breath came out. The woman didn't say a word as she started the engine and pulled away from the alley. The car moved quickly through the streets, the tires crunching on the wet pavement. Megan stared out the window, her pulse still racing. What had just happened? Who was that man? The woman glanced at her, her eyes intense, almost as if she were trying to decide something. "You're lucky," she finally said. He was close. Too close. Megan's throat tightened. Who was he? The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she focused on the road, her grip tight on the steering wheel. "That's not important right now," she said, her tone cold. Megan didn't press. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. But the silence between them was thick, suffocating. Megan's mind raced, questioning everything. The woman had come out of nowhere, just in time. But how had she known? And why hadn't she been scared? The woman turned a corner sharply, her eyes flicking to Megan briefly. "You don't need to know," she said again, her voice quieter this time. "Just know you're safe." Megan wanted to say something more, to ask about the man, to ask about the woman, what she was doing here, but the words didn't come. The car slowed as they reached a neighborhood, familiar but distant in Megan's frazzled state. The woman stopped at a small house, pulling into the driveway. "We're here," she said, shutting off the engine. Megan's eyes widened, confused. "Here? But why are we—" The woman turned toward her. Her eyes were hard now. "You're not safe yet," she said. "Not until we get things sorted." Before Megan could ask more, the woman got out of the car, walking briskly toward the door. Megan sat frozen for a moment, her mind still reeling. What was happening? Why was she here? As she stepped out of the car, she noticed the darkness surrounding the house. It wasn't just night. It felt different. And then a strange thought struck her. What if she wasn't safe at all? Megan's feet felt like lead as she followed the woman up the driveway. The house loomed ahead, dark and silent. Her instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run. But she didn't. Her legs moved forward of their own accord. The woman unlocked the door with a quick twist, stepping inside. Megan hesitated at the threshold. "Come in," the woman said, her voice almost impatient. Megan stepped over the threshold, her heart pounding in her chest. The door shut behind her with a soft click. Inside was quiet, too quiet. The house smelled faintly of something metallic, sharp like iron. The air was thick with tension. The woman led her down a narrow hallway, her heels clicking against the floor, the sound hollow in the stillness. Megan couldn't take her eyes off the walls as she walked. They were covered with pictures, disturbing images, like fragments of forgotten memories. Faces she didn't recognize, expressions twisted in pain or fear. Her stomach churned. At the end of the hall, the woman stopped in front of a door. She turned the handle, pushing it open. Megan's breath caught in her throat. The room was dimly lit, only a small desk lamp casting shadows over everything. On the walls, more pictures, more faces, and then she saw it, a table. On it, a notebook. Pages filled with writing, scrawled hastily in black ink. The woman picked it up, flipping through the pages. "You're not the first," she said, almost to herself. Megan stared at her, confusion and fear mixing in her eyes. What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked up, her eyes cold. "It means you're part of something much bigger than you realize." Megan took a step back, her breath catching. Her pulse thundered in her ears. I don't understand," she stammered. The woman's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You will," she replied, her tone low, almost predatory. And in that moment, Megan realized just how deep she was in. The door had shut behind her, and there was no way out. Not anymore. Megan's breath grew shallow. Her pulse surged in her ears. She wanted to back away, to run, but the room felt like it was closing in. The woman's eyes never left her. "Sit down," she commanded, her voice sharp. Megan stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The woman's gaze hardened. "Sit." Now, Megan's legs gave way, and she found herself sinking into a chair before she could even think. Her hands gripped the armrests as if they might somehow anchor her to reality. The woman moved to the desk, still holding the notebook. She flipped another page. The sound of the paper turning echoed in the silence. Megan's stomach twisted. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The woman paused, then looked at her with a strange, unreadable expression. "It's your story," she said softly. Megan's confusion deepened. "My story," she repeated, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, everything you've been through, everything you will go through. It's all written here." Megan's heart raced. Her mind reeled. This was insane. She shot up from the chair. "No, this doesn't make sense. I don't know you. I don't know anything about this." The woman didn't move, just watched her with cold eyes. "You will," she said again, her voice still calm, but it was laced with something darker now. "Everything has a purpose. Everything connects." Megan's mind spun as she stumbled back towards the door. She reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Her breath caught in her throat. She yanked harder. Nothing. Her panic intensified. The woman took a step closer, a slow, deliberate motion. "You're trapped now, Megan," she said, her voice almost soothing. "The moment you crossed that alley, your fate was sealed." Megan spun around, eyes wide. "What do you mean? What do you want from me?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She just watched Megan with an unreadable expression. Her fingers brushed the pages of the notebook again, flipping through them with deliberate slowness. Megan's thoughts blurred. She couldn't think straight. A cold shiver ran down her spine. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The woman's lips curled into a dark smile. "I'm the one who keeps the story moving." Before Megan could ask anything more, the woman reached into the desk drawer. A flash of metal caught Megan's eye. A knife. The same glinting steel from the alley. Megan's breath caught in her throat. The woman took the knife in hand and turned to face her fully. "Now," she said softly, stepping closer, "let's see how this part of the story unfolds." Megan's legs shook, her body frozen in fear. The woman's hand gripped the knife tightly, the blade catching the faint light in the room. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Megan's breath came in short, panicked gasps. She couldn't move, couldn't think. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat thumping in her chest, deafening in the stillness. The woman's eyes never left her, the coldness in them seeping into Megan's bones. She took another step forward, the blade held loosely at her side. "You don't understand," she said, her voice soft, almost comforting. "But you will." Megan tried to back away, her eyes darting to the door, the window, anything. But the room was closing in. The walls seemed to press in on her. The air was thick, suffocating. "Why are you doing this?" Megan whispered, her voice trembling. The woman didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer still, her shoes clicking sharply against the floor. "I told you," she said. "You're part of something bigger. You've always been part of it." Megan's mind raced. What was she talking about? What did this woman mean? But the fear gripped her, tightening around her chest. The woman stopped just a few feet away from her. She raised the knife slowly, the point of the blade gleaming. Megan could feel the coldness radiating from it. Her throat tightened. She reached out, her hand trembling, desperate. "Please," she begged, her voice barely a whisper. "Please don't." The woman's smile didn't falter, but there was something else there now, something cold and unfeeling. "You don't get to choose, Megan," she said softly. "It's not your story to control." Before Megan could respond, the woman lunged forward. Everything happened so fast. The knife sliced through the air. Megan stumbled back, barely dodging the strike. The woman grinned, the cold gleam in her eyes intensifying. Megan's hands flew up, desperate to protect herself, but she could feel the panic clouding her mind. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. The woman didn't stop. She kept moving forward, her steps measured, calculating. Megan was trapped, cornered. The woman's grip on the knife tightened. She took another step. Megan's heart was in her throat. Suddenly, the door behind her slammed open. A figure entered, tall and shadowed. The woman froze, her eyes snapping to the newcomer. The man who entered was familiar. Megan's blood ran cold. The man from the alley. He was here. Again. Megan's breath caught in her throat. The woman looked at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Get out," she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. But the man didn't move. He stepped closer to Megan, his eyes cold. "She's not your story to finish," he said, his voice low and steady. Megan couldn't breathe. She was caught between them, two figures, each as dangerous as the other. The woman's gaze flickered between them, anger flashing in her eyes. "You don't understand," she hissed. "She's part of this. She's always been part of it." The man didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on Megan. "She doesn't belong here anymore," he said, his voice unwavering. And in that moment, everything changed. The room seemed to darken, as if the very air held its breath. Megan was no longer just a pawn in their twisted game. She had become something else, something more. And the game was about to end. The air in the room felt like it was thickening, suffocating Megan. Her heart pounded, her chest tight, eyes flicking from the man to the woman, trying to make sense of the chaos. The woman's eyes burned with fury, her grip on the knife tightening, as if she was willing to tear through anyone in her way. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," she spat, her voice low and venomous. The man stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the room. The tension between them crackled. "I'm not here for you," he said to the woman, his voice calm but deadly. "I'm here for her." Megan's throat went dry. Her head spun, trying to process everything. The man reached for her, his hand brushing her arm gently, almost protective, despite the storm of violence that had just erupted around her. "You need to trust me," he said, his voice low. "I'm here to end this." But Megan couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She was stuck in the eye of the storm, torn between two unknowns, both as dangerous as the other. The woman's lips twisted into a cold, mocking smile. "You think you can just walk in and end this?" She laughed, her voice cutting through the stillness. "You're too late. You have no idea what she's capable of. No idea what she was meant for." Megan's mind was reeling. What did she mean by that? What had she been meant for? Why was this happening to her? The man didn't respond. He took another step forward, his eyes locked onto the woman's, unflinching. He wasn't backing down. The woman, seething with rage, raised the knife high, a single, swift motion. But before she could strike, the man moved with lightning speed. In a blur, he was between them, his hand knocking the knife aside. There was a sickening crack, the sound of bones snapping, but it wasn't the man's. The woman's face contorted in agony as she dropped the knife, clutching her wrist. Megan gasped, her hands trembling. The man turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Run." Megan didn't hesitate. She spun toward the door, her legs moving before her mind could catch up. She threw open the door, the sound of it slamming against the wall ringing in her ears. She was outside, but it wasn't enough. She needed to escape. She needed to disappear. Her feet pounded the ground as she ran through the dark, empty streets. The rain had started again, cold and biting, soaking through her clothes, but she didn't care. The woman's screams echoed in the distance, but Megan didn't look back. Her heart hammered in her chest. She couldn't stop, not until she was far away. The streets blurred around her as she sprinted, every step driven by pure, raw panic. Behind her there was movement, footsteps, not the man's, the woman. She was following her, faster now, relentless. Megan's breath was ragged, her body protesting with every movement. She rounded a corner, desperate to get lost in the maze of alleyways. But the woman was closer. Too close. She couldn't outrun her. Megan stumbled, nearly falling, but she caught herself. A figure appeared ahead, silhouetted in the light of a passing car. Megan's heart skipped a beat. It was the man. He was waiting for her. She reached him, her legs almost giving out beneath her. "Go," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "This way." He grabbed her arm, pulling her into the shadows. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving the woman standing in the street, her figure lost in the rain. The night swallowed them whole, and for the first time since it all began, Megan felt a flicker of hope. But she didn't know yet what she was truly running from. That Megan's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as the man pulled her through the dark alley, the sound of her footsteps blending with the distant murmur of the city. Every corner, every turn, felt like they were plunging deeper into unknown territory. She couldn't keep up with him. His pace was steady, controlled, while her legs burned, her body desperate for air. "Where are we going?" she managed to whisper, the words barely escaping her cracked lips. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the street ahead, his jaw tight, with focus. "We need to get to safety," he said finally, his voice low. "Safety." Megan echoed, her mind still whirling from the chaos inside that house. From what? From her. He didn't respond, but she could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the weight of something heavier than fear. He knew more than he was letting on. They kept moving, the sounds of the city fading as they made their way deeper into the winding streets. Megan's legs felt like they might give way at any moment, but she didn't dare stop. The image of the woman, the knife, the cold, twisted smile, it haunted her thoughts. Who was she? What had she meant when she said Megan was part of something? Part of what? The man led her to a rundown building, its exterior weathered and worn by time. A faded sign hung crookedly above the door, but Megan couldn't make out the letters. He pushed open the door, which creaked in protest. The dim interior was sparsely furnished, Nothing more than a few old chairs and a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling. Megan stepped inside, her shoes squeaking against the dusty floor. "Sit down," he said, gesturing toward a chair in the corner. Megan didn't argue. Her legs threatened to buckle beneath her as she sank into the chair, her body trembling from the effort of running, from the terror that still gripped her chest. The man didn't sit. He paced back and forth, his gaze fixed on the door, on the shadows creeping in around them. "She'll come after you," he said after a moment, his voice steady but heavy with an undeniable truth. "She won't stop until she finishes what she started." Megan's stomach churned. "What do you mean? What started? What is all this?" The man stopped pacing, his eyes finally meeting hers. "She's not just some random threat," he said quietly. "You were chosen, Megan. Chosen for something bigger than both of us." Megan's pulse quickened, panic starting to rise again. "I don't understand. I don't know what you're talking about." He looked at her with a steady gaze, as if weighing the words before he spoke them. "There are forces at play here," he said slowly. "Things you can't even begin to comprehend. The woman, the one you saw, she's part of a group that has been hunting you for a long time, and you've been running from them without even realizing it." Megan's mind reeled. Hunting her? She wasn't special. She wasn't part of any group. "Why me?" she whispered. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved toward a battered desk in the corner of the room, rifling through the papers scattered there. When he spoke again, his voice was almost distant, as if he were trying to piece together fragments of a puzzle. "You were never meant to be ordinary, Megan. From the moment you were born, you were marked. They knew you would become something." His words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Megan's heart skipped a beat. "Marked? What does that even mean?" He turned back to face her, his eyes now shadowed with something darker. "It means they know who you are. They know what you're capable of, and that makes you a threat to them, a threat they can't afford to let live." Megan felt a chill spread through her, deep into her bones. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but her mind was spinning. How could any of this be true? How could she be a part of something like this? The man took a deep breath, as though preparing for something. He walked toward her, his movements slow, deliberate. "You need to understand, Megan. What you saw back there, that wasn't just a random encounter. That was a message. A warning. Warning." Megan repeated, her voice weak. "A warning that they're closing in. And you don't have much time left to figure out who you really are." The room seemed to darken around her. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. A warning. She hadn't just stumbled into something by accident. This was real. And the worst part was, she had no idea what she was supposed to do about it. That Megan's breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words hung in the air, suffocating her. She was marked. Marked for what? Her mind raced, spiraling into confusion. The man stared at her, his eyes unwavering. There was no softness in them, no comfort, just the cold truth. "Why me?" Megan asked again, her voice trembling. "What am I supposed to do with all of this? I'm just me." "You think you're just you," he said, his voice tight with something almost like frustration. "But you're not. Not anymore. They've been watching you for years. You've been living under their radar until now." The silence in the room felt thick, the kind of silence that could swallow a person whole. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice a whisper now, desperate for answers. "They're an organization," he said, "one with ties everywhere. They've been manipulating things from the shadows, pulling the strings of power. They've been building toward this. You're the key to it all, Megan." Her stomach twisted. "Key to what?" The man stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I don't know all the details," he said, "but I know this. You're the one they need. You're the one they'll do anything to control." Her head spun. Everything around her was unraveling, every question leading to more confusion. "What do I do now?" Megan asked, feeling lost, fragile. He leaned in, his eyes never leaving hers. "You need to understand what you are," he said. "You need to understand your power, your purpose, before they get to you." A loud crash from somewhere outside the building made her jump. Megan stood abruptly, panic rushing through her veins. "They're here," the man said, his tone turning cold, and he grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back of the room. "They've found us." Her heart slammed against her ribs. The woman, she had to be the one outside. She wasn't giving up, not yet. The man led Megan down a narrow hallway, his steps fast and urgent. Every door they passed was locked, sealed. The walls seemed to close in around them, and she could feel the pounding of her pulse in the silence. The man stopped suddenly in front of a heavy metal door. "Get in," he said, his voice low. Megan didn't question him. She stepped inside, her legs trembling as the door slammed shut behind her. The room was small, barren except for a few scattered crates and an old, dusty chair. The man moved quickly, pulling something from his pocket. A small device, sleek and black. Megan's mind was racing. What was he doing? "Stay here," he said, his voice sharp. "I need to take care of something." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing through the door. Megan's eyes darted to the only window in the room. She could barely see anything in the darkness, but she could hear footsteps, distant shouts. The woman, she was close. Her breath quickened. The walls around her felt like they were closing in again. What was this place? What was she even supposed to be doing? Megan's fingers curled into fists, her thoughts racing. She wasn't going to sit here, waiting for someone else to decide her fate. She had to find a way out. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the crates stacked against the wall. She moved toward them, heart pounding, and began to dig through them, tossing aside broken wood and rusted metal. A small, sharp object caught her eye, a metal pipe. It was heavy, the kind that could do some damage. She picked it up, her hands shaking, but determination lighting a fire in her chest. She wasn't just some pawn in someone's game. She was more than that. She had to be. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Megan turned toward the door, gripping the pipe tightly. She didn't know if it was the right choice. She didn't know if it would even work. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let them take her. Not without a fight. The footsteps outside grew louder, each one like a drumbeat in her chest. Megan gripped the metal pipe, her fingers numb around it. She could hear muffled voices, but they were too far away to make out clearly. The woman's voice stood out among them, sharp, venomous. "We know she's here. We can feel her." The woman's words slithered through the door. "She can't hide forever." Megan's heart pounded harder. They were coming. They were getting closer. Her eyes darted around the room again. The small window was too high for her to reach. The only exit was the door, the one she'd just entered through, and it was the same one they'd come through. There was no way out. At least, not the way she had imagined. Her grip tightened on the pipe. She didn't have time to think things through. She had to move. The door rattled. A harsh knock echoed against the thick wood. Megan jumped, her pulse spiking. "Open up, Megan!" The woman's voice was commanding now, close enough that it sent a shiver crawling down Megan's spine. Megan took a deep breath. She couldn't let them know how scared she was. She couldn't let them see the weakness they'd been waiting for. She crouched, her eyes never leaving the door. Then slowly, she backed into the corner of the room, her muscles tense and coiled. The knock came again, this time louder, the wood groaning with the pressure. "Megan," the woman called. "You can't hide forever." Megan closed her eyes for a split second, remembering the man, his words still echoing in her mind. "You're the key." For the first time, Megan realized that the woman wasn't just threatening her. She was hunting her, chasing her for something only she could understand. Megan's grip on the pipe tightened. She couldn't let them win. She couldn't let them control her fate. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the sound of a creaking door. A sudden, cold draft swept through the room as the door swung open. The woman stood there, her silhouette framed by the darkness beyond. Her eyes glinted with something cold, something predatory. "Megan," she said softly, her voice dripping with malice. "You can't run anymore." Megan raised the pipe in front of her, holding it like a weapon. "I'm not running anymore," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart was a wild drum in her chest. "I'm not afraid of you." The woman's smile twisted into something darker. "You should be." Before Megan could react, the woman lunged forward, a blur of motion that sent a rush of air past her. But Megan was ready. She swung the pipe hard, the metal connecting with the woman's arm with a sickening thud. The woman cried out in pain, stumbling back, her hand clutching her shoulder. Megan's pulse raced, adrenaline surging through her veins. She didn't give the woman a second to recover. She swung again, the pipe slashing through the air, aiming for the woman's chest. But the woman was faster. She dodged the blow, her body twisting with unnatural grace, and before Megan knew it, the woman had grabbed her arm, twisting it painfully behind her back. The air was knocked from Megan's lungs as the woman forced her forward, slamming her against the cold wall. Megan gasped, her vision blurring for a moment. The woman's breath was hot against her ear as she whispered, "You can't escape me, Megan. You never could." Tears stung at the corners of Megan's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She could feel the weight of the woman's body pressing her into the wall, her grip tightening with each passing second. Megan's mind was racing. Think, think, think. Her foot shot out, kicking the woman's shin with all the force she could muster. The woman hissed in pain, stumbling back just enough for Megan to break free. Megan spun around, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. This was her chance. With all her strength, she swung the pipe once more. It connected with the woman's side, the sound of the impact almost deafening. The woman staggered, her eyes wild with rage. "Enough!" she screamed, her voice laced with fury. But Megan wasn't done. She swung again, the pipe landing on the woman's arm with a sickening crunch. The woman screamed this time, dropping to her knees, her hand clutching her broken arm. Megan stepped back, her breath ragged, the pipe now heavy in her hands. The woman glared at her, but there was something else there, something Megan hadn't seen before. Fear. "You think you've won," the woman spat, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what you've just unleashed." Megan didn't speak. She didn't need to. She knew she hadn't won. Not yet. But for the first time, she felt like she had a fighting chance. And that was enough for now. The woman's eyes flickered to the door behind her, her face contorted in rage. "I'll be back," she said, her voice cold. "This isn't over." And then, without another word, she vanished into the shadows, leaving Megan standing alone in the room. Her breath came in jagged gasps, but she didn't let herself collapse. Not yet. She had to keep moving. There was more to this, more to what she was meant to become. And she had to find out what it was before they found her again. Megan didn't wait. The room felt too small, too close. Her pulse was still racing, and the silence felt like it was closing in on her. The woman was gone, but the threat still loomed. She had no idea how much time she had. No idea if the woman would come back, or if someone worse was waiting just outside the door. Her mind was spinning. Asterisk, what had the woman meant? What was this all about? Asterisk. Megan's eyes darted around the room, her body tensing. She had to escape. There had to be a way out. She wasn't alone anymore, though. She couldn't ignore the presence that lingered in her mind, the man who had pulled her from the chaos, the one who had told her she was more than just a pawn. She had to trust him. Taking a steadying breath, Megan moved toward the door. Every step felt heavier, her nerves fraying at the edges. She couldn't stay here, not with the woman still out there. The door creaked open, and Megan stepped cautiously into the hallway. It was empty, silent, but the walls still felt like they were closing in. She moved quickly, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The hallway stretched before her, every turn a new uncertainty. She had no plan, no direction, only a desperate need to get away. Just as she reached the end of the hall, a door at the far end slammed open. Megan froze. The man stood there. His face was hard, unreadable, but his eyes, those eyes, were focused on her, unyielding. "You shouldn't have left," he said, his voice low, almost regretful. Megan's heart hammered in her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "Why is this happening?" The man stepped closer, his expression softening, just a fraction. "Because you're the key, and they've been waiting for you to unlock what they've been after." Megan swallowed, her throat dry. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for any of it. But she didn't have a choice anymore. The man reached out, offering his hand, and for a moment Megan hesitated. Everything inside her screamed to run, to get away, but something deep inside told her this was her only chance. She took his hand, and together, they disappeared into the night, ready to face whatever came next. But Megan knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. Megan's hand trembled as she gripped the man's, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had fought, she had survived, but now, with him beside her, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was only just beginning. The streets outside were eerily quiet, the world holding its breath as if waiting for the next chapter to unfold. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, the heavy sound of her footsteps on the pavement as they moved in silence. "Where are we going?" she finally whispered, her voice raw from everything she'd been through. The man didn't answer immediately. He just kept walking, his expression a mask of determination, but she saw the flicker of something else behind his eyes, a shadow of doubt. Or was it regret? "You're not safe here," he said after a long pause. "Not anymore. But there's a place where you can be hidden, a place where they can't reach you." "Not yet." Megan swallowed hard. "And after that? After they find me? What happens then?" He glanced over at her, his gaze flickering for a brief second. "Then we fight." Megan's breath hitched. Fight against them? Her mind felt like it was spinning, trying to make sense of everything she had learned, everything she had seen. The woman, the chase, the cryptic words about her being the key to something bigger. Her pulse quickened. For the first time, Megan allowed herself to ask the question that had been gnawing at her since the moment she'd been dragged into this world she didn't understand. "What do you mean, I'm the key?" He didn't answer right away, and Megan wondered if he even knew the full truth. But when he spoke, it was with quiet conviction. "You were chosen, Megan," he said, his voice steady. "You have something inside you, something they need. Something that could change everything." Her mind raced. The key to what? To a world she didn't belong to? To a future she couldn't control? "Will I ever be normal again?" she asked, almost to herself. The man didn't look at her this time. His focus remained ahead, a hint of sadness in his gaze. "You were never meant to be normal," he said quietly, "but you can still make your own path." They continued walking, the city's lights flickering around them, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Megan's feet felt heavy, but her heart was light, with the faintest glimmer of hope. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. As they disappeared into the night, the weight of what was to come still hung over her. But Megan knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it, no matter what.